British Prime Minister Boris Johnson has warned that now is not the time for the UK to ease its lockdown. He said his government would consult widely and rely on science to make a decision. He made the comments on his back at work after recovering from COVID-19. He said the curve was beginning to flatten and emphasised the need to avoid a second spike. The UK now has over 154,000 infections and more than 20,000 deaths. It's among the worst-hit countries in the world.
I can see the long-term consequences of lockdown as clearly as anyone. And so, yes, I entirely share your urgency. It's the government's urgency. And yet we must also recognise the risk of a second spike. The risk of losing control of that virus and letting the reproduction rate go back over 1. Because that would mean not only a new wave of death and disease, but also an economic disaster. And we would be forced once again to slam on the brakes across the whole country and the whole economy, and reimpose restrictions in such a way as to do more and lasting damage.
For more on this, let's cross over to Ollie Barrett in London. Ollie, it seems likely the lockdown will be extended beyond the 7th of May, but there's already calls for Mr. Johnson to present an exit strategy.
Certainly, and that's the difficult balance for Boris Johnson to strike now that he is back at work. Try and talk about reasons for optimism. He even talked about the success that Britain has had in dealing with the outbreak so far, but not letting any complacency come in when it comes to the British people and how they are observing the rules and regulations in place with the current period of lockdown. The picture is beginning to emerge, though, from discussions going on behind the scenes and from some of the hints that were being dropped by Boris Johnson and by his ministers as well, of a lockdown which probably will be eased in the not too distant future, but in a phased way. We are certainly not going to have lockdown immediately removed completely. There will be some parts of the economy which can open up one by one to try and get the economy going in a way that the scientists believe can be done safely to avoid what Boris Johnson spoke about there, that second peak, that second wave that he and the National Health Service here in the UK so want to avoid.
Ollie, there's been a big fall in daily COVID-19 deaths. So is that being taken as a sign that the curve has flattened?
There is certainly some cautious optimism that the peak has passed here in the UK. Government officials and scientists are describing it really as the peak passing at the moment. They don't want to quite yet start referring too much to it in the past tense, but that is certainly the picture that is emerging now here in the UK, with the daily fatality numbers heading in the right direction, although still a large, grim number every day that we are receiving, but also hospital admissions, the number of people in intensive care beds as well. Also, those curves going in the right direction too. That R rate, that transmission rate in the community is the key here. The government scientists and medical advisors want to get that as low as they possibly can before lockdown is eased, because that, they believe, gives them the best chance of then keeping the outbreak under control and again avoiding that second peak.
Indeed. Thanks very much. Ollie Barrett speaking to us in London.